What if humanity didn't evolve by chance, but was engineered for a purpose? According to the ancient Sumerian texts and the interpretations of the Lost Book of Enki, that's precisely what happened. Our origins were not random, they were calculated, designed, crafted in the genetic laboratories of the gods. But these gods were not supernatural, they were the Anunnaki, and they were facing a crisis that led them to the ultimate act, creating a new species to serve them. This episode explores one of the most provocative ideas in ancient mythology, that humans were not born, but built. After the Anunnaki rebellion in the mines, the ruling council faced an ultimatum. The workers would no longer serve. Enlil called for force. Enki proposed innovation. Instead of forcing gods to mine gold, he argued, why not create a new being, one that could withstand the environment, follow commands, and ease the burden? The council reluctantly agreed. But this wasn't a simple matter. They weren't cloning. They were crafting a hybrid, fusing Anunnaki DNA with that of a native hominid species already evolving on Earth. The challenge? Creating a being that could think, work, and, eventually, reproduce. At the center of this unprecedented task was Ninhursag, Enki's half-sister and a revered figure in Sumerian lore. Known later as Mami or Mamitu, she was the goddess of birth, biology, and healing. Together, she and Enki selected a suitable hominid, a primitive bipedal creature, likely what modern science calls Homo erectus, or a close relative. They saw in this creature raw potential, a biological chassis. Enki extracted genetic material from the Anunnaki, likely his own, and combined it with the DNA of the Earthling. But the process was not straightforward. Dozens of early attempts failed. Some could not speak. Others were sterile. Many were unstable. Ancient tablets describe these failures in eerie detail. Beings with animalistic traits, twisted forms, or minds that could not grasp commands. Each failure brought them closer to understanding the delicate balance required. Then, after years of trial and error, came success. The being that emerged was healthy, intelligent, and capable of labor. He could speak, follow instructions, and perform tasks. He was not a god, and yet, not quite an animal. They named him Adamu, the one of the earth. He was the first fully functional hybrid, not a clone, not a beast, but a new creation. He became the template for humanity. To ensure balance, Ninhursag later created a female counterpart, Ti-Amat. Not to be confused with the ancient goddess or planetary namesake, this Ti-Amat was a partner, a co-creation, and the beginning of gendered human life. But the real question emerged next. Should they be allowed to multiply? With Adamu and Ti-Amat proving successful, a new debate emerged among the Anunnaki elite. Should these beings be allowed to procreate? Enlil, ever the enforcer, argued no. He feared that a multiplying hybrid species could spiral out of control. To him, humans were tools, nothing more. Their existence was functional, not sacred. Allowing them to breed would create an unpredictable population, and worse, give them the illusion of autonomy. As a result, the first humans were sterile by design. They were kept in a contained zone, a controlled garden near the city of Eridu, later mythologized as Eden. There they worked, studied, and lived under supervision, but they did not evolve. They remained as Enlil intended, obedient and confined. Enki, however, disagreed. He believed humanity deserved more than servitude. He saw potential, not just for labor, but for learning, for growth, for consciousness. So, in direct defiance of Enlil's orders, Enki made a secret intervention. He enhanced the human genome further, unlocking cognitive functions, language depth, and most importantly, the ability to reproduce. This act, encoded in myth as the serpent giving knowledge, was not about temptation, it was about activation. The so-called tree of knowledge, a symbol of genetic enhancement. The serpent, Enki himself, and the fall from Eden, not a sin, but the beginning of self-awareness. Once the new reproductive gene sequences were active, something miraculous happened. Ti-Amat became pregnant. She gave birth, not to a clone or laboratory being, but to a naturally born human, a being capable of passing down memory, behavior, and lineage. This was the true beginning of the human race. When Enlil discovered the breach, he was furious. He accused Enki of treason. He declared humanity a dangerous species, one that must be controlled, surveilled, and limited in knowledge. From this point forward, the relationship between gods and humans would never be the same. No longer were humans tools. They were descendants, offspring of both Earth and the heavens. The events in Eden split the Anunnaki into ideological camps. Those loyal to Enlil believed that humanity should be suppressed, manipulated, and used as necessary. These were the gods of wrath, fear, and law. Those aligned with Enki saw humanity as an experiment worth nurturing. These were the gods of wisdom, magic, and transformation. This division explains much of ancient mythology's contradictions, where gods are both benefactors and tormentors. Because they were not unified, they were at war with each other, and humanity stood in the middle, and it was only the beginning. Once humans gained the ability to reproduce, their numbers began to grow rapidly. They were no longer confined to the laboratory sanctuaries of Eden. They spread across the regions where the Anunnaki operated, first near the cities of Eridu, Bad Tibira, and Shurupak, and then into the mountains, plains, and river valleys beyond. At first, the gods observed from a distance. Humanity's simplicity posed no threat. They worked in the mines, carried materials, and learned basic agriculture. But with each generation, human intelligence began to increase. They started forming families, tribes, and primitive societies. They began asking questions. And some of the Anunnaki began teaching them. As humans evolved, a controversial chapter unfolded. The Igigi, stationed in orbit and isolated for millennia, began to descend to Earth more frequently. There, they encountered the daughters of men, women who, by then, had become stunningly beautiful, graceful, and intelligent. And they took them as wives. Ancient texts describe this in detail. In the Book of Enoch, these beings are called the Watchers. Their unions with human women produced hybrid offspring, known as the Nephilim in biblical terms, or great men of renown in Sumerian lore. These were giants not only in stature, but in intellect and charisma. They became kings, priests, and warriors, divine human hybrids who ruled over early human societies. To ensure order, the Anunnaki began establishing cities, installing rulers, and teaching them writing, astronomy, agriculture, and sacred geometry. Thus began the age of kingship. But not all gods agreed with this new mingling of blood. Enlil, watching from Nippur, was furious. He saw the humans multiplying, the divine bloodlines spreading, and the Igigi breaking protocol. To him, the Earth project had spiraled out of control. He declared that humanity had become corrupt, unruly, and a threat to the divine order. He began advocating for a reset, a cleansing, a flood. Enki, however, could not allow it. He had grown too close to his creation. He believed in humanity's potential and refused to watch it be erased. Their rivalry was no longer philosophical, it became existential. And in the shadows of this divine conflict, the stage was being set for the greatest cataclysm in ancient memory. As the population of humanity grew, the Anunnaki began shaping early society. They taught humans how to construct temples, ziggurats built as platforms to commune with the sky gods. These weren't just monuments, they were control centers, aligned with stars, solstices, and magnetic fields. Humans learned not only agriculture and masonry, but ritual, ceremonial acts to honor their creators. Festivals aligned with celestial events. Offerings were made not to abstract deities, but to very real beings who lived in the mountains, flew through the skies, and issued decrees from palaces of stone and fire. These teachings became the foundation of what we call religion today. But in the beginning, it wasn't faith. It was obedience to a living presence. Enki, ever the teacher, introduced systems of writing and mathematics, tools necessary for humans to manage resources, record seasons, and build cities. In Sumer, the cuneiform script became the earliest known writing system. It recorded not just goods and trades, but also laws, myths, genealogies, and prayers, each echoing humanity's hybrid origin. The Anunnaki installed priest kings, part human, part divine, to rule over these early city-states. These rulers enforced a cosmic order called Me, a concept blending science, morality, and divine law. And so, under the guidance of the gods, human civilization began, not in chaos, but in code. Humanity was not an accident of evolution. We were forged from desperation, refined by rebellion, and awakened by forbidden knowledge. Our gods were not united. They disagreed, they fought, and they shaped our world according to their rival agendas. In their struggle, we were caught, and in their legacy, we still walk. The story of our origins is far older than we've been told, and in the next episode, we will confront that legacy head-on. As the gods descend into war, the heavens shake, and the human world is nearly wiped clean. This is only the beginning.